April 14, 1943, 18,000 feet above the Solomon Islands. The sun was a molten disk sinking toward the Pacific, bleeding orange light across scattered clouds and the black silhouettes of two converging fighter groups. Lieutenant Kenji Takahashi squinted through his canopy, his Mitsubishi A6M0 cutting through humid air with a whistle only pilots could feel in their bones. Below him, the jungle shimmered in patches of gunfire where American supply ships were unloading near Guadalcanal. He radioed to his wingman. "2 bogeys, low 6 o'clock, probably Wildcats." His voice was steady, confident. For months, they'd toyed with these clumsy American fighters like hawks toying with pigeons. But as the shapes grew larger, something was different. These weren't Wildcats. The wings bent downward like a bird mid-dive, and the engines roared with a sound deeper, meaner, a growl, not a whine. "New model," his wingman muttered. "Heavy." "Then they'll die heavy," Takahashi replied, rolling into the dive. The Zero's nose cut into the air, tracing sunlight across its polished fuselage. He fired first, a burst of 7.7mm rounds streaking across the gap. The American plane didn't even flinch. It simply rolled, impossibly fast, the sun flashing off its blue skin as it dove toward the sea. Takahashi followed, throttle wide open, his aircraft straining. The gauges rattled. At 400 knots, the Zero began to shudder. The American didn't slow. In fact, it was pulling away. "What is that thing?" the wingman shouted. Below, the bent-wing bird arced low across the waves, its massive propeller throwing mist into spirals of gold. It began to climb again, too sharp, too fast. Then the sun caught its canopy, revealing a white star on its wing. Takahashi pulled up hard, sweat dripping into his eyes. He'd lost visual contact. His heart pounded. The radio hissed with static. Then the roar of gunfire. The Corsair came from the sun. Its 6.5 caliber machine guns lit up like a saw blade of fire, ripping across the Zero's right wing. The Japanese plane jerked sideways, smoke trailing in a long black arc before exploding against the sea. Whistling death, the Americans called it. Takahashi had just learned why.
2 years earlier, on the opposite side of the Pacific, Connecticut, 1941. Inside the Vought Sikorsky factory, the air smelled of hot metal and oil. Engineers crowded around blueprints sprawled across a drafting table. In the center, Rex Beisel, the Corsair's chief designer, jabbed his pencil at a sketched wing joint. "The problem isn't the engine," he said, "it's the propeller." The Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp sat behind him, a 2,000 horsepower monster, too powerful for any existing Navy fighter. Its propeller was massive, over 13 feet in diameter, and it needed clearance to spin without striking the carrier deck. Normal wings wouldn't work. So Beisel drew the impossible, a gull-shaped wing that bent downward, then back up. It was unconventional, even ugly, but it solved everything. The bent-wing bird could house the big propeller, reduce drag, and still fold neatly for carrier storage. By spring 1942, the prototype, the XF4U-1, was ready. During its first test flight, it screamed down the runway like something alive, breaking the 400-mile-per-hour barrier and setting a record for single-engine fighters. The ground crew erupted in cheers. Beisel just smiled quietly. He knew what that speed meant. The U.S. Navy now had a fighter that could outfly anything Japan had. But when carrier tests began, optimism faded. The Corsair's long nose blocked a pilot's view during landings, its landing gear bounced, and it had a nasty tendency to stall low and hard. Test pilots called it the Ensign Eliminator. The Navy shelved it temporarily, sending it instead to the Marines, who didn't need carriers. At Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, the first Marine Corsairs arrived in early 1943. Mechanics swarmed them with curiosity, running hands across the smooth blue fuselage. The wings seemed alien, like something nature had built, not men. One young pilot laughed. "She looks like she's made of paper." The crew chief grinned. "Tell that to the Japs when she's done with them." Within weeks, that joke would turn into prophecy. February 1943, Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. The tropical rain had just ended, leaving the air thick with steam and the smell of burnt fuel. Marine pilots moved through puddles and coral dust toward their new machines, the F4U Corsairs gleaming in fresh navy blue. Captain Archie Donahue, a lanky Texan with a calm drawl and a fighter pilot's nerves of steel, ran his gloved hand along the Corsair's curved fuselage. "Ugly as a buzzard," he muttered, "but if she flies half as mean as she looks, we'll get along fine." Moments later, the whine of starter motors filled the air. One by one, the Corsairs came alive, engines coughing, then bellowing into full-throated thunder. The double Wasp roared like an animal trying to break loose. The ground vibrated underfoot. "Hellcats ain't even here yet," Donahue's wingman shouted over the noise. "Guess where the test run?" At 00:0900 hours, the first combat patrol launched. Blue-gray fighters climbed through layers of cloud until the Pacific shone below like molten glass. Then, dots on the horizon. Dozens of them. Zeros, slicing toward them in V formation, sunlight flashing off their silver wings. "Bandits, 12 o'clock high!" The Corsairs tightened formation. The Japanese pilots dove with confidence, expecting another easy kill. They'd faced Wildcats and P-40s, slow, heavy, predictable. But the first time they tried to climb away from the Corsairs, everything changed. The Americans went vertical, straight up, something no Wildcat had ever managed. Their engines howled as the gull wings carried them skyward in a perfect arc. At the top, they flipped inverted and dove back through the Zeros, tracers lancing across the sky. Donahue lined one up in his sights. The Zero tried to roll out, too slow. 6.5 caliber Brownings spoke in unison, a thunderous burst. The Japanese plane erupted in flame, trailing smoke toward the jungle below. "Jesus," his wingman breathed. "That thing climbs like a devil." Donahue just grinned. "Told ya, she's ugly, but she bites hard." By the time the surviving Zeros limped home, their commanders were shaken. Reports filtered back through the Japanese fleet. New American fighter, faster than the Zero, dives like a stone, climbs like a rocket. Unconfirmed nickname? Whistling Death. They'd soon learn it wasn't just a nickname. Late May 1943, the Russell Islands. The sky was pale and clear, a calm mask over a killing ground. Captain Archie Donahue's Corsair Squadron, VMF 112, was on combat air patrol, cruising at 17,000 feet. Below, a convoy of American transports crept through blue-green waters toward Guadalcanal, vulnerable to air attack. At 10:20 hours, the warning crackled over the radio. "Bogies inbound, large formation, heading south." 20 Zeros with dive bombers in tow. The Marines turned into the sun and dove. Donahue throttled forward. The Corsair's propeller bit into the wind, the aircraft accelerating past 420 knots. As he dove, the airflow screamed through the wing roots, the distinctive, eerie wail that would give the F4U its haunting name, Whistling Death. Below, the Japanese formation began to scatter, caught off guard by the speed and angle of attack. Donahue's guns roared. One Zero disintegrated under a burst, another spiraled away trailing fuel. The remaining enemy fighters tried to climb, but the Corsairs were already higher and still closing. On the Japanese radios, chaos reigned. "They're faster! They're climbing through us!" shouted one pilot.
before static swallowed his transmission. Donahue's wingman, Lieutenant Cook Cleland, banked left and raked a bomber's wing with tracer fire. The G4M Betty exploded in midair, raining debris across the jungle canopy. By the time the last Corsair turned home, the sky was littered with drifting smoke. 13 enemy aircraft destroyed, not a single Marine lost. That night, in a makeshift mess tent lit by hurricane lamps, the pilots traded weary smiles. They'd seen it up close, the machine's true power. The Corsair wasn't just another fighter, it was a statement. America had mastered air superiority again. Across the Pacific, Japanese intelligence reports carried a new code name for the F4U, Whistling Death. Commanders noted its speed, climb rate, and durability, and warned pilots to avoid prolonged dives or vertical fights against it. The once invincible Zero had finally met its match. For men like Takahashi, those still flying, the skies that once belonged to Japan were shrinking mile by mile.
August 1943, Rabaul, New Britain. Once the proud fortress of Japan's southern air power, now it was becoming a graveyard of burning aluminum. The humid air reeked of oil and cordite, the sound of anti-aircraft guns rolling across the jungle hills every afternoon. Lieutenant Kenji Takahashi sat beside his grounded Zero, the once glorious plane scarred with bullet holes and patched metal. The crew chief wiped his hands, shaking his head. "She can't climb like she used to," he said softly. "The Americans, they come down too fast." Takahashi stared toward the distant sea, where faint contrails stitched the horizon. He'd seen those blue-winged devils before, the ones that screamed through the sky, dove like stones, and rose again untouched. Rumors had spread among pilots. Whistling death, they called it. At first they thought it was a superstition. Then the kill ratio started coming in. 20 Corsairs to 1 Zero. When orders came that morning to scramble, Takahashi climbed into his cockpit anyway. Pride still had its hold. The Zero was light, graceful, built for dogfighting, but it was built for another time, another enemy. The formation rose from Rabaul's volcanic rim, engines whining in unison. Within minutes, the black dots appeared above. Corsairs again. The fight unfolded fast. Takahashi banked hard, trying to lure one into a turn. The American didn't take the bait. Instead, it climbed, impossibly steep, and then came down in a screaming dive, guns flashing. Tracer fire tore past Takahashi's canopy. He rolled, pulled up, but the Corsair was already there, matching every move. Its sheer power erased the one advantage the Zero once had: maneuverability. A burst hit his tail. Smoke filled the cockpit. Takahashi yanked the canopy open, the air rushing in hot and wet. Below him, the Pacific waited, blue and merciless. He bailed out, parachute snapping open just as his aircraft spiraled into the sea. Hanging beneath the silk canopy, he looked up. The Corsairs were climbing away, their wingtips catching the light, curved like predatory birds. For the first time, he understood what Japan's engineers had refused to admit. The Zero's era was over. The sky now belonged to the machines that had once seemed impossible, heavy, ugly, and unstoppable.
September 1945, Okinawa. The war was over. The gunfire that had once shaken the Pacific skies was gone, replaced by the soft hum of engines idling on sun-baked airstrips. Rows of F4U Corsairs stood wingtip to wingtip, their paint scuffed, gun barrels dark with soot. Captain Archie Donahue stepped down from his cockpit for the last time. The plane beneath him, serial number 17915, had flown through more than 200 combat towers.
Its fuselage was pocked with bullet scars, its propeller edges chipped from coral dust, yet it had always brought him home. He ran a hand over the bent wing that once drew laughter from mechanics and doubt from the Navy. It had become a symbol now of American ingenuity, of the stubborn refusal to quit. The same gull-wing design that nearly grounded it had made it the fastest, deadliest fighter in the Pacific. Across the ocean, in a quiet hangar outside Tokyo, Kenji Takahashi stood beside a wrecked Zero. Its frame was riddled with holes, its white paint faded by sun and salt. He touched the flaking Hinamaru insignia and exhaled. The Zero had once ruled the sky, nimble, elegant, unmatched. But war had changed, and so had the machines that fought it. For both men, enemies who never met, the Corsair marked a turning point. It wasn't just faster or tougher. It represented the shift from craftsmanship to industrial power, from intuition to innovation. When the Korean War erupted a few years later, the old bent-wing bird would return once more. Strafing convoys, dive-bombing rail lines, still roaring through flak as if refusing to age. Pilots there would say the same thing the Marines did in '43. She saves your life more times than you can count. In museums today, her dark blue skin gleams under spotlights, and visitors still ask why her wings bend that way. The guides smile, repeating the words of one old mechanic from Guadalcanal. Because sometimes the ugliest ideas turn out to be the deadliest. The legend of the F4U Corsair, the Whistling Death, was written not just in blueprints and bullets, but in the men who trusted her, feared her, and tried in vain to outrun her.